Welcome to this free lecture. This lecture is taken from my ZBrush Full Anatomy and Character Creation course. Details of this course can be found now. If you like what I'm doing here, visit the page, check it out, see if you like it, and take the course. Okay, welcome to this section, creating the base mesh for the body. Now in this section what we're going to look at is two ways in which to create a base mesh. One is using Dynamesh with a sphere and pulling it out, and the other method is to use Z-spheres. Now the third method that we're not going to discuss is actually if you created a base mesh in another application and you imported it in. That would be another way that you could create a base mesh. Now before we start, you need to make sure, if you're beginning in anatomy, you need to make sure that you're actually looking at your Canon guide that I supplied you in the section before this. So on the guides you have your Canon guide, so if we have a look at that, you can use that as a reference to get the base mesh. So here it is here. So I'll be working to this in measurements, in terms of measurements across. I'll be cross-referencing this with this diagram. Okay, so I've got that open on my other screen. It's just as a reference guide, and we're going to start off now by creating the Z-sphere version. Now with the sphere Dynamesh method. Now before we start, I need to tell you that because we're working with Dynamesh, I'm not going to be pulling the fingers out or the feet out, because what happens at a low resolution, let me just show you. If I have a sphere like this and I turn that into a Dynamesh version, let me make that a Polymesh 3D like that, and I Dynamesh it, come down to here, and I have it set on a low setting like 64, and I hit Dynamesh, so this is now a Dynameshed model. What will happen if it's too low resolution is it will pull together. I'm just going to bring this down in size so I can re-Dynamesh it, so I lose a bit of that resolution. I'm going to turn the floor off. So if I was pulling the hand out, for instance, let me just go to move this down, pretending it's the palm of a hand, something like that. If I then started to actually pull the fingers out of this with a low resolution on Dynamesh, let me just do it here. Let's turn that off. And like that. Let's use move, pull these out, pretend they're fingers. The problem is, because I've got a low resolution down here, as soon as I control drag, they're all going to kind of switch up. So I've got two options. At a low resolution, I can stretch the fingers out, and by stretching the fingers out, then that's going to allow me to actually get a bit of a gap between them. So you can mask a bit off here, and then I could move this finger out here. Let me just come back here, Control Alt. We pull that over there, get the idea, and then I Dynameshed it. Obviously it's going to hold together. Now the thing is, I'm not going to pull them out at a low resolution, because I'll only pull them out when I'm on a higher resolution. So if I'm on a higher resolution like 712 and I re-Dynamesh them, you can see they're going to stay nice and tight. So with this first method that I'm going to show you, the Z-spheres and the Dynamesh, I do not pull the fingers or the toes out until I get it to a higher resolution. It's not a problem, it's just things to bear in mind. Okay, now the thumb wouldn't be a problem because it's quite a long way away from the other fingers, so you wouldn't have a problem with pulling the thumb out like that. Okay, but this is just things that you need to bear in mind when using this first method that we're going to do in the next lecture. All right, so the other thing is the actual frame, how we're actually going to pose it. Okay, so we got this, and this is an A-frame. So her arms are quite close to her hips. So you've got an A-frame like this, and you've got a T-frame where her arms are straight out. So it resembles a T or this resembles an A. However, I work with it between A and T. Now the reason that I don't go right to T is it's too far stretched, and A, it's too tight in this area, so if I Dynamesh it, it will join up to the actual torso. So by opening up to about 45 degrees, it means that I still keep a gap, so it will Dynamesh better at a lower resolution. So these are all things you need to bear in mind. Also, the legs are too close together, so they would actually seal up around the groin. So I keep the legs a bit wider apart as well. Obviously, I check it first before I go into Dynamesh, and I set it all up. And we're going to do that all in the next lecture anyway. So after I've shown you how to create the base mesh using a sphere and Dynameshing, then we're going to look at using Z-spheres to actually create a base mesh. And this method, what we'll be doing is we'll be adding subdivision levels, and then we can Dynamesh it later once we've got the actual shape and everything else, or we might not even need to Dynamesh it. It's really up to us, but we'll talk about all of that later on. So this is an intro to this course where we'll be creating just the base mesh. Now if I show you an example of a base mesh that's already been done, if we got one here. So this is a base mesh that Madeline Spencer did for her book, and you can see very simple. And if you look, she's put subdivision levels in there as well, and she used this Z-sphere method, but I actually think she imported a model from Maya. Alright, so we'll be looking at doing, I'm not going to put the ears and those things in, I don't think we need to, but this is what we're trying to get to, so we can start to sculpt on it. Okay, let's move on in the next lecture.